let me start with very descriptive data, but I think that this is literally the result that somewhat confirmed the value of running this podcast and running this series. Because basically what we observe, and we compare technical versus organizational readiness, and we found out that technology is more ready than organizations. So our respondents agree that 80% of our respondents agreed that their technology infrastructure was effective at supporting their remote work, while just 50% agreed that their managers were supporting their remote work effectively, and 63% agreed that their organizational procedures were supporting their remote work effectively. So what does that mean is that, and that's an interesting thing, is that technology seems to be there and seems to be ready, again, considering our respondents. But on the other side, it seems that managers and the organizational design of the organizations and of the team seems to be lagging a little bit. And this is why we strongly believe, Anish and Jay, that it is very important to share research and best practice on how to work remotely. Because at this point, the challenge is clearly more organizational than technical. This would not have been the same, say, 20 years ago. But as of now, clearly, technology is proving to be very effective.
True, and I think this is consistent with what I've listened. I've listened to the interviews of Envision and GitLab and everyone else who seems to be working all remote. And then pretty much they are not using so many technologies, right? To the minimum, you need a Zoom, Skype, Teams, or a soft solution like that for video. And you need one for chatting. And then, of course, email is always there, but they're not very much relying on that. But the two biggest solutions that they use is video and chat. And you have plenty of options. And some of them are even free for smaller companies.
I would also say that both of them also rely a lot on their own product.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very interesting practice. So in a sense that their own technology, their own product helps themselves to work. So GitLab is relying extensively on GitLab itself to work, and that allows them to work asynchronously. In fact, we are covering a little bit a description of how GitLab works. The same works for Envision, which is basically also themselves rely on their own product to develop that. But yes, it's true. So I would also say that, for instance, GitLab does not even rely on emails.
Yeah,
that's a very interesting instance. So they reduce the type of technology they rely on. Clearly, their claim is that they cannot do anything that they were doing without the technology. But yes, clearly the problems that they need to solve and the most pressing problems are not related to technology. Still, both GitLab and Envision are trying a set of innovations more at the organizational level. So they are really careful on how they design the organization, how they design the incentive, how they design the division of tasks, the allocation of tasks, the flow of information. But still, the technology are pretty standard. So everyone can get access to the technologies that they are using, basically.
This is good to know that at least one part works well or well enough, and that we need to focus on another segment, and that's the organizational side, and that's the supporting employees and supporting managers to move to remote work. At least we know that this is where the focus should be.
Exactly. I also think that at the beginning, the focus was mostly on technology.
Cool.
So if I have to think that the reasoning was, if we have to face this challenge of working remotely, let's get the technology right. So the first hygiene factor is that in our case, our sample seems to work very well, but still, if we need to, we're not claiming that basically the technology is irrelevant. We're simply saying that, yes, you need to get the technology right, but it's clearly not enough to make an organization work and to make your employees satisfied of working in this condition and making your organization effective.
Understood.
Let's move to the core outcome of interest, which is the self-reported productivity. And this is the answer to the question that we put at almost at the end of the survey. And we asked, on the whole, do you think you have been more or less productive when working remotely instead of working from your office? And what we observe is that still it's self-reported productivity, but 40% of our respondents mentioned that they have a productivity improvement. 37% mentioned that they have no difference in productivity, while 23% of them had claimed to have a productivity decline. But I mean, we were interested clearly in this measure, but what is most interesting is instead what are the predictors of productivity. So what are the positive and negative correlates of productivity? And let me start with the first point, which is the hierarchical level. So hierarchical level is positively correlated with self-reported productivity. What does that mean? Basically, in the survey, we splitted the hierarchy in 3 levels. So we had managers of managers, so people that had at least one subordinate, which is a manager. Managers, so the ones that have subordinates, but within this group of subordinates, there was no manager. And then the group of subordinates, the one that had no report. Mm-hmm. And what we found out is that the managers of managers are the one that report higher productivity. We have a set of competing hypotheses. So it might be just a measure of wealth, in a sense that they live in a context that might be more conducive for work. One other alternative hypothesis might be the one of having more time to get isolated. So it might be the managers of managers gets a lot of input while they are in the office. And in this moment, they have instead more space for being isolated. So still, this is one of the relevant dimensions. So we see that managers of managers are the ones that self-report better productivity.
This is really interesting, and I think I was thinking that I just had a podcast recording yesterday with Ravi Gajendran, right, who talks about autonomy, and I was thinking that maybe the managers of managers they might help themselves to more autonomy, or they might receive more autonomy for their managers, right? Because they are higher in the hierarchy, so they get maybe more tenure in the company, more trust because they've been working there before, they have proven their results, so they get more autonomy versus them giving autonomy to their people. And it does feel like research in normal work, remote work settings, autonomy does lead to better productivity levels. So I was thinking that maybe this is related to this as well.
Yeah, of course. In a set, can you just rephrase the relationship?
Yeah. So the higher the autonomy, so Ravi did several researches which connect autonomy to productivity in remote work settings.
Right? Yeah, and he found that there's a positive relationship.
Exactly. He found that there's a positive relationship, right? So I was thinking that at this level, right, the managers of managers, then they might get more autonomy because first they might give it to themselves. Usually if you have a CEO level or an executive level, they are not really keen on command and control type of leadership, right? It's more, I let you work, I trust you, we've been working together, we've been exposed to each other for a long time, we've been making decisions together. So the autonomy level that I feel that it's given to managers of managers, it's way higher than they give their subordinates, right?
Okay.
Because the lower you go in the hierarchy, or at least that's my experience by working in organizations, the lower you go in hierarchy, the more you have a kind of command and control style of leadership. It's the easiest to learn, right? That's again research proving that it's really easy to learn. You just tell people what to do, when to do it, and you control their environment. Whereas to give autonomy, you have to learn how to give trust, you have to learn how to empower. So the higher you are in a hierarchy, the more experience you get, you might learn how to give this autonomy,
the more autonomy
exactly,
you can build for yourself, basically.
exactly, and you can build for yourself,
this
and
is
it's
one
given to you as well.
potential mechanism.
Yeah, and it might be a potential mechanism, but with a caveat as well that the research that Ravi and his collaborators did was done in normal remote work settings, right? Not during a pandemic.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was my correlation, that because I had a discussion with him yesterday, and it felt interesting to correlate this maybe with autonomy as well.
Okay, let me just move to the next point, which is that related to one other predictor is previous experience in working remotely, and mostly the relationship is explained by the ones that basically it's a positive relationship, and the core difference is between the ones that never experienced to work remotely and the ones that work remotely for less than a year. These are the categories that perform far worse, while instead the ones that at least had a little bit of experience, so they were working at least once a month, or at least once a week, or even more frequently, they have better performance. This is somewhat obvious, since this is something that can be expected. So at least having a small experience in working remotely can increase your productivity. And let me just cover one aspect, because sometimes in research, the other part that is important is to find what are the aspects that are not relevant. So you might have an hypothesis that, for instance, industry or company size or nature of work might affect the productivity. None of them seems to be relevant, both in terms of statistical significance, both in terms of explaining variance. We explain the no relevance of industry, mostly due to the type of sample we are relying on. So still, these are people in the office. But that's interesting. Though there were some industries that were concerned on the fact that maybe our industry is so peculiar that we cannot go remote. That seems to not be the case for office level people. Company size still seems to be not relevant. And again, nature of work is mostly due to the fact that most of our respondents are workers that work on intangible outputs. So in this respect, the feeling is that there was not even much differences. So the nature of work that was most prevalent was making decision, producing intangible output, producing a service, and managing people. So all of them seems to be activities that all in all can be all performed.
Very interesting.
One other aspect that is a good predictor of productivity is work-life balance. So the ones that reported higher work-life balance then were also the ones that reported higher productivity. And we also believe that in this respect, this may even be a source of inequality, because the two factors that explain mostly the increasing work-life balance is basically space available. So how the space available is fit for work. So this clearly may be conditional on wealth, on the type of condition they're around. And the other is time of commuting, which I would say is also, except from influencing productivity through work-life balance, it also has a direct effect on productivity. So the ones that are more happy to avoid the commuting are the ones that report a higher productivity, which I guess tells something very interesting, especially on the future of remote. So this means that the biggest gain, still somewhat obvious, but the biggest gains are in countries, in places, in areas in which people will avoid to commute. So this reduction in commuting, especially if it's particularly sensitive, then yes, it is transformed into an increase in productivity.
And I think it's maybe multiple folded with avoiding commuting, right? So I'm just thinking that maybe you use the time for commuting, and you have places like London, which is just one city, but commuting time might be 2 hours or even 3 hours a day. Paris is the same, right?
Okay.
Sometimes Singapore can be the same. If you live in the other side of the country, if you're taking the bus, it can take you 45 minutes to get to work, and then it's an hour and a half a day. So you can use that space and time to do something different, to even work. And then I'm also thinking it's motivational as well, because instead of being tired, it does tire you. I did do commuting for longer times as well. You just feel like, hey, this is such a blessing that I can do this, and you're just happier to work and do anything else.
Absolutely. I completely agree. But clearly, we also have to take into account the opposite. So there are many cities in which commuting might be very limited, many small cities. And in that respect, clearly, avoid commuting may even have very important implication on the environment. So that would have been a completely different story, and we're talking at a policy level.
Yeah.
But on the other side, I believe that still we need to take into account that not all the countries may have the commuting problem that, for instance, is pretty common in the US. So the degree to which remote might get traction may also depend at a country level to the degree to which commuting influences the life of people.
True. Very interesting.
Then we move to the negative side of the story. So what are the factors that instead negatively affect productivity? And the ones that miss the social interaction were the ones that have a lower productivity. In this respect, we have to take into account that office is also a social environment. So people may get utility from social interaction. Another important aspect that we found in our analysis is that we said, okay, maybe the ones that were missing social interaction were also the ones that need to interact socially just to solve problems. So we have a variable that was, we need constant communication to solve problems. That was not the case. So social interaction was independent, whether they had to continuously communicate or not. So the idea here is that basically confirms some existing evidence that social interaction is somewhat an intrinsic motivator. And so it is per se a motivator, and it seems that this research confirms that.
Isn't this interesting? Because you would think that only if you need to interact, right, then you would miss it and it would affect your productivity. But it's very interesting that actually just because you don't have your colleagues around and you're not having the relationships that they're used to have, it doesn't motivate you enough to be productive. You're just missing that social interaction. So it demotivates you to work and be productive.
I would think that there are also other two reasons. One is related to the fact that usually what we observe in all remote companies, and we had a recent conversation with Darren that you're going to interview, so basically he's going to cover this topic again. But usually people that work remotely tend to compensate for this lack of social interaction by engaging a lot with their own community, which is not the current condition. So given that there's already some quarantine condition and isolation, you cannot basically compensate this lack of social interaction in the office with alternative social interaction, maybe also with people that matter for you the most. And the other aspect is that, again, really the office may be really a social environment. If you think about expats have a smaller social network in many respects. So an expat finding the job, especially at the beginning, most of the relationship that he has in the city. And so taking this opportunity apart for the expat may be highly problematic, and there may be missing social interaction. And in fact, this is in a managerial prescription. At the end, we're going to cover how companies may try to address this type of problem.
Yeah, and then I'm even thinking that we are social beings, right? This has been proven over and over and over again. So without social interaction and without the social interaction at work, without the community social interaction, then maybe things like depression kick in. And then, of course, you're not productive because you're not thinking about work. You cannot think about work in those moments. And by the time it takes you to get out of that and find your social connections and just pull yourself up, it might take you a bit of time to become productive. So I'm kind of curious how this evolves as the survey progresses.
Absolutely. And I think also Jay has done some work on meditation and mindfulness and the effect of productivity in especially in Wuhan. So I guess he will share his own research in the future. The other factor is distraction at home. So the more the distraction at home, the more the lower the self-reported productivity. And I mean, I strongly believe that one of the reasons is that, and we also started looking at the text of, in the survey there were two parts of the text. There was a feedback part and a challenges part. And we are starting exploring the text, then we are going to do something more rigorous, but just by looking at some of the comments, basically one argument was this is not the usual setting, and because we have kids at home. We have also our partner at home. So houses get very crowded and distraction may be many and several and maybe even more important. So in this respect, again, this and within the managerial prescription, we are also trying to cover this because we think that managers should acknowledge this type of challenge. So the fact that there may be competing forces and to think carefully about how to design their teams and their organization in a different way so they can address this problem of distraction at home.
Yeah, definitely. And I was talking with Ravi yesterday, and then the suggestion was that, hey, cut your employees some slack, at least at the beginning, until they get used to their environment, until they manage to negotiate something with their family. And we were both sharing stories that we are still negotiating with our families, right? Because it's so easy. Hey, you're at home. Hey, Marco, do you want to cook something? Do you want to do this with me? Let's do this together. It's sunny outside. Do you want to sit on the terrace? Do you want a glass of water? So they're all additional interruptions than what you're used to when you're working. And because you are there, they don't necessarily recognize that you are working. And maybe sometimes you just work in the living room next to them. So yeah. Cutting some slack, at least at the beginning, until everyone gets to set up their home office is really important.
Absolutely. And it's also interesting because in a recent conversation we had with Sid Sibrandi, which is the CEO of GitLab, we asked him, okay, look, what's the first suggestion you would give to people that are starting to work remotely and they're now facing this COVID crisis? And he said, look, take some rest and take your time. So his response was clearly in another direction than we expected. But clearly the point here is that everyone needs to learn. So organizations need to learn, managers need to learn, workers need to learn how to work. Especially, as we said, the ones that have no previous experience. So basically the ones that face this type of challenges suddenly.
Yeah, and there are distractions. I've been working from home for 10 years, and it's mostly integrated with my life. But there still are distractions. It's not that you ever get to have a perfect work from home as you never get to have a perfect work in the office kind of day, right? There's nothing like perfect. Absolutely. So you always get distractions. So even having some slack in your calendar and not booking everything hour by hour is extremely important, even though it seems that from home you'd be able to do it because it takes you maybe 2 seconds to get some water and everything is close to you. But no, you do need some slack in your calendar and you do need to take into account that there are distractions. And especially now that everyone is moving at home and mostly people that have not done this before.
Absolutely. I totally agree. So there's a strong importance. Also, even to one suggestion, this is not at least research-based, at least in our research, but clearly to separate the space where you work, the space where you live, when possible, clearly. So that's clearly one relevant strategy. So
maybe that's
if you have two different tables, use two different tables.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's what the connection with the wealth in hierarchical level, right? Because if you might have an additional office where to work from. So of course you are more productive because you can run away from distractions.
Yeah. And that still speaks a lot about the, say, future of remote. Mm-hmm. So we need to take into account that there are some cities in which the cost of real estate is such that people might not strictly work there.
Yeah.
So, hybrid remote solution would force people basically to still live in some specific cities, and where the cost of real estate may be particularly high, and still, so at home, there would not be the correct space to work remotely. So still, this is something that we need to keep in mind also when this whole COVID isolation will finish, hopefully as soon as possible. But irrespective of that, for the future of remote work, it's clearly important to take into account also this factor of real estate space and the fact that remote workers need enough space to work properly.